Okay, we should be ready to go. Lucas,
Right.
please
And
proceed.
sure. And again, Eric, active. Feel free, guys, to interrupt anytime and ask questions. But hopefully, we'll have some Q&A time for the last part of the of today. So, anyways, let me start with from the beginning and talk about what Jerez is, or sherry in its English form. And we always want to remark, the fact that Jerez is such a diverse um, wine region, offering so many different styles, and that's something that is really attached to the region. We never talk about a single expression of wine or single profile. We could be talking about the driest wine you can try and the sweetest wine you can try on any given occasion. So the same day, you could have several glasses of wine in front of you from different wine regions. A few of them could be from Jerez, and I'm telling you, chances are that wine from Jerez can be the driest of them all, and the other one on the other end could be the sweetest of them all. So a large diversity for sure. We always talk about the spectrum of Jerez, covering a lot of ground. No, a 45 wine, as you well know. So from a historic 45 wine region, that means that there's addition of alcohol here in the process, different from other classic 45 wine regions. For the most part of the production here, the fortification only takes place once the ferment is complete. So we are adding alcohol over dry wines, and that's why Jerez is such a dry wine in its origins. Then you say, but I drink a lot of sherry, sweeter Jerez. That's true, but that's not involved in the actual fermentation or fortification process. That will be something later on. A port is sweet by nature because you arrest the ferment by the addition of alcohol. Sherry is not the case. The sherry method is completely different from any other port, Madeira, or Marsala method. And then, of course, from Spain, because Jerez authentic Jerez can only be produced in the southern corner of the Iberian Peninsula. Although you still find some fake sherries in the US, unfortunately, these days. Anyways, history, very quick run up here. 3,000 years of recorded archaeological evidence. So many different societies living in the region, residing there over centuries on many times. So a lot of cultural background, languages, all different, know-hows, way to do things. And you can see that clearly with the name, the evolution of the name of the region. So 3,000 years, we say. The last 500 have been particularly important with, the interest from England, the kind of like the expansion, of the importance of the growth of the trade, especially with northern Europe countries. England for sure the number one, but many others following shortly after. You have here the building of the bodegas that you can find still working these days. Many things happened during these last 500 years, with a lot of ups and downs. This is a region that has lived through, has survived. They're saying like three important crises already. So it's gonna stick because it's done it before, and sherry is gonna stay with us. Now, Lustau, in particular, is a producer that was established by Mr. José Ruiz Verdejo almost about 125 years ago, in 1896. And the thing with Lustau is that they were born. The business started as an almacenista, which is We call them stock keepers or warehouses would be more the direct translation from Spanish. So, similar to what you have in Champagne with the Champagne house and then the grower. Along those lines, not exactly the same thing. You have almacenistas in Jerez who are usually small, family-owned, very artisanal. And then these smaller guys don't produce enough wine to be given a shipping license. So they're forced to sell their wines along to the bigger houses, so they could be unknown because their business is just local and they don't have actual brands. And that was Lustau, what Lustau was at the beginning. And for about 70 years remained like that. And then it's in the 1950s or so that the business finally grows enough to become a sherry shipper, an exporter. And then now Lustau is a house of Lustau, selling their products abroad. Then in the 1990s, they expanded out to all larger facilities, bodegas in both El Jerez and El Puerto, and they also have interest business in Sanlúcar. So Lustau is the only winery that can label with their own brands wines from the three cities. Nobody else really has wines coming out of the three at the same time. So something that makes Lustau a little different. If we are to define Lustau, compare it to the rest of the 70 houses that you find in Jerez, we could say a few things. Lustau offers a large selection, a wide array of styles. We always think that that's truly an asset because you need to taste a lot of different sherries to get a hold of the region. So Lustau offers you that diversity at an entry level many times, and affordable prices. Lustau also is quite small compared to other much larger producers, with only about 4,000 casks of their own soleras. There are other brands from other producers that require 18,000 casks alone for a brand. So imagine the difference in volumes here. So large variety, small, and then their wines are kept in cask for longer than the average. Then if you take the whole Jerez region, Lustau goes above average as far as aging their wine. So those are the three things that are always worth keeping in the back of your mind when you're presenting this winery from Jerez, and you have to compare it to other wineries. Let's take a look at the region, and things like the soils are very important. We'll talk about those in a second. But basically what you see is what we know as the Marco de Jerez. El Marco de Jerez is the sherry region, and it's quite small. I mean, it's only about 7,000 hectares, which is about 18,000 acres. It used to be larger 30, 40 years ago, with about 22,000 hectares over here and more in here. But they pulled out a lot of vines that were possibly in lesser sites. But we always say that I think it's fair to say that they kept the best of the best, because everything here, especially within this area here, within the three towns, is known as Jerez Superior, and this is like the Gran Cru of Jerez, or the Jerez Clásico. The green areas are all the vineyard sites, and then the white and the gray and darker gray here are the soils. And all these top vineyards, these are the historic sites, are now in the best parts. And those that were less interesting have been get rid of, because, again, the production now, the demand is smaller than 40 years ago, and the production adjusted to that. But conserving the quality, maintaining the vineyards that were at some point studied by Columella, a guy who was born in Gadir, today's Cadiz, 2,000 years ago during the Roman era. And he was already talking and studying the wines from the vineyards from here, from Jerez. South, as you can see, this is the southernmost top, the southernmost tip of the Peninsula Iberica. It is, in fact, the southernmost wine growing region as far as continental Europe. You can produce wine farther south in Morocco, Algeria, or the Canary Islands and Madeira. But as far as the continent goes, this is the southernmost part. So warm, definitely. Africa is just across the Strait of Gibraltar. Mediterranean climate, but with a lot of influence from these winds, the Poniente and the Levante. So Mediterranean with a lot of influence from other aspects like the water, the body water all around it, or the land masses, not only from Central Iberian Peninsula, or also from Africa. So those things will ultimately affect the region on a daily basis. A lot of sunny days, 300 days, and a substantial amount of rain. Rainfall up to 25 inches, which is not bad for the latitude. But irrigation is forbidden, so rain is a very important thing here. And because of that, Albariza soil, we'll talk about that in a second, is crucial for the quality because of its water retention power. So good amount of rain, but mostly during the winter and spring, and little during the drier growing season. And then the two winds again, we have the Poniente wind, the one that comes from the Atlantic Ocean and is cool and with high humidity levels, excellent for aging the wines in the towns. And then the Levante, more from the Sahara, and it's a stronger wind, drier and hotter. So the fluctuation of both humidity and temperature could be quite dramatically, again, on a daily basis. So this is pretty much the whole region. And as you can see, there are different towns. There are 9 total, but there are 3 that are kind of outstanding here, because these are the 3 that famously make up the figure known as the Triángulo de Jerez. This, as you can see, as you unify the 3 cities. Why are these 3 towns so important? Well, because these are the only 3 places, municipalities, townships, where you can age the wines if you are to label them as sherry. So you can, and this is important, everybody, you can make wines from grapes from all over the region. Hopefully it will be from this area here, but also you see vineyards down here. But the wines have to be aged for a minimum of 2 years by law these days within the boundaries of these 3 locations. And then you have Sanlúcar de Barrameda here, receiving it by the mouth of the river, receiving a lot of that Poniente influence. You have El Puerto de Santa Maria here, also by the water, very close to the water, but a little more sheltered from that Poniente influence. Sometimes we see more of the Levante. And then finally, Jerez de la Frontera, which is, as you can see, miles away from the ocean, a little more continental, with warmer summers and drier summers, and more of a temperature shift, if you will, between day and night. And the 3 age wines. So when we do these classes, we always have a glass from each of them under the same style. And you can see the difference coming from the actual location as opposed to grapes or vineyards, which could also play an important role. But in this case, we're talking about the aging locations after the wines are made. We were saying about these important soils. There are several types of soils, but Albariza by far is the soil for Jerez. And this is because it's been the soil that was already studied thousands of years ago. And it's a very particular one. A lot of limestone, calcium carbonate, and very poor organic material. And because of that and the texture, acting as a sponge, Albariza is very effective at retaining that moisture, that winter rainfall that then is so needed during the summer. So Albariza not only provides that chalkiness that we like so much to the wines, also keeping the yields down, being so poor in organic material. Albariza is necessary for the thirsty vines, and most of the top vineyards have been for thousands of years and still are sitting in these Albariza soils. Then a percentage of much smaller vineyard surfaces in more like barros, which is more clay type soils. Those are kind of like not so used these days because the vineyard is smaller and they only keep the top sides. And there is a few of the vineyards located, especially, let me go back, these vineyards here around Chipiona, in these more coastal parts, are sitting in more sandy soils, arenas. But these arenas are used for another particular grape. Let's make the connection between the soils and the grapes. This is, by the way, a vineyard owned by Lustau, the Monteguilillo Pago, in the northern part of the appellation. And this is another vineyard owned by Lustau across the region, actually very close to the ocean, with more sandy parts. And that's why they have here more Moscatel than anything else. Let's talk about the three varieties and how they interact with the soils. Palomino, by far the number one grape variety with 98% of the vineyard surface. Chalky Albariza soils for sure. Moscatel in the sandy coastal parts, but only about 1 or 2%. And Pedro Ximénez the same. Pedro Ximénez likes Albariza soils rather than sandy soils, but there is only about like 1 or 2% of Pedro Ximénez in the region. So these two, very small percentage, these two used to produce sweet wines. Palomino, the sole responsible for the dry wine. So again, 98% of the grapes are processed in their origin to produce dry wine. Most of the wines that you'll taste that are dry will come from Palomino. These dessert wines will come from either Moscatel or Pedro Ximénez, and then the actual blends could be, which are those sweeter Jerezes that were so, and still are so important for the region as far as volume, and so successfully in UK and Northern Europe and stuff. Those could be blends from a little bit of these two, put in a remain of Palomino. So dry wines with a little bit of sweet wines. Those are the blends. Now, there is something else in Jerez to talk about, and that's the effect of the actual buildings. We said that Lustau in the 1990s expanded out to larger building complex in the two different towns, and also have interest in Sanlúcar, but these are mostly in Jerez and El Puerto. And these are buildings that were sometimes built 200 or 250 years ago. And as you can see, that they show a very spectacular design, more like a cathedral style, but that they were made that way for a purpose. And that purpose is definitely to create the ideal conditions for the aging wines. And those conditions will be cooler, stable temperature year-round, a large flow of air, continued flow of oxygen here of air. That's why it's so spacious. And then higher levels of humidity. The higher the humidity, the better. Those are the things that you, as a Jerezano, as a cellar master, want to keep pretty much throughout the seasons. Summer could be more challenging, winter could be a different season, but more or less you want to maintain the conditions at all times. How you do that? Well, high ceilings, keeping the heat off the barrels, windows that are put on those walls that receive more of the poniente humid wind and suck that wind into the building. Obviously the thick walls, even the ground here, this floor, this is made of what they call the alvero, which is a material, dirt, special dirt that you can water. You can sprinkle here with water or flood with water, and that will help with that, cool environment, high levels of humidity. So there are things that the buildings are ready to do to counterbalance potential, harsh environments coming from outside. But as you can see, everything happens from the ground above. And in Jerez, nobody is like digging a hole underground. All the wines are kept for long periods of time, potentially above the ground. And what the building does is to capture the best of what's coming from outside and maintaining the conditions throughout the season. So that's why we talk about el terroir de la bodega, the effect of the building on the aging wines. And then the cask also are important. La bota jerezana, 600 liters, mostly from America because of the connection between, the region and America. Christopher Columbus left from El Puerto and established that trade between Jerez and America. So American oak, and then seasoned. We never talk about new oak here in Jerez. In fact, the more seasoned, the older the oak, the better for the top wines. So you don't want any new oak tannin, new oak flavor going into this very fragile, delicate wines. That's why the coopership, the work on these barrels is also so important and so remarkable locally, because they rather repair these barrels over and over again than replace them altogether. So a lot of barrel work is always being performed for sure. Now, there are different ways you can break Jerez down. The dry wines versus the sweet wines. We know now that 98% of the grapes are originally used to produce a dry wine. So let's stick with the dry wines. Let's make dry wine here using the sherry method. So what happens here is that we're going to be collecting these Palomino grapes, and these grapes could be coming from different vineyards. We took a look at the region and the shape of the land. So coming from different parts, more coastal parts, more like interior, inland vineyard sites. But the grapes, usually when they're like let run free, and not pressured too much, these very delicate, what they call mostoyema, this free run juice, will be usually put aside to produce the finos and manzanillas. And whatever you obtain after a second larger press, let's say up to 4 kilograms per square centimeter or so, this second press juice will be again put aside in a different part of the winery to produce olorosos. And then anything from there only allowed to be distilled or vinegar production. So think of champagne. We always compare Jerez and champagne because there are many things that are parallel. The production of the cuvée versus the tie, the same idea, based on the amount of pressure, with a limitation here of 70 liters per every 100 kilograms of grapes. So finos and manzanillas and olorosos, are the two major dry wine families, and everything else, it will be kind of like an offspring coming out of these two. Finos, olorosos, based on the profile of these base wines. Now, when you have the grape juice at these two different profiles, you are gonna be fully fermenting that grape must. You're gonna ferment out all the sugars, and once you finish with your fermentation after 3 weeks or so, you have a dry wine that they call mosto here. And these mostos, coinciding with the two families, fino versus oloroso, The ones that are showing more finesse, those base wines will only be 45 up to 15%, whereas the mostos, the base wines that show a little more what they call gordura, fuller mouthfeel, a little more coarser texture, maybe more phenolic because of the extraction, those will be 45 all the way up to 17%. So we see that we continue with the two-arm method process, based not only on the profile of the wines, also on the amount of alcohol that we add to these wines. And then these two, now called sobretablas, freshly 45 base wines, both 15% fino and 18% or 17% olorosos, now will be ready to enter their solera systems. And the solera y criaderas, is this very unique, also very, very sherry related way of aging, which is basically a fractional, dynamic fractional aging method, where you have groups of barrels that are clearly marked and that contain wine at a different states of development. So you have a solera system made up by a solera group of barrels, which is a little confusing, but solera in this case is the name of the last group of barrels containing the oldest and the finished wine in the system. And then you have a number of criaderas, could be 1, 2, 3, 4, even 10 or more, that will be containing all of them the same wine, but separate from each other. Wine that is younger. Wine that is younger than the previous wine. So the solera, again, will be the oldest and ready to go wine, complete. And then these will be younger wines. And every time you pull some wine out of the solera for bottling, you're going to be pulling the same amount of wine from the other levels and cross-blending every time over the level above. So no vintage, obviously, because there is older and younger wine in each of these barrels. But you come up with an average calculation of age. So basically, if you turn 25% of your stock each year, your wine is 4 years old. It's a very simple equation concerning the inventories, the amount of wine and the rotation of the wine per year, and that will give you the average age. So you start here, you bottle, then you replenish these guys with Primera Criadera, and then Primera Criadera, you use the wine from Segunda Criadera. And then when you get to the top of the system, the top end of the system, here you'll be using that sobre tabla, that base wine that we just made 5 minutes ago, and that will come into the system from the top end. And every time you move wine, it gets all blended, and that's why this is a non-vintage system. These average ages could be from the base wine, 0 to the minimum 2 years by law, but in fact the industry averages around 4. Averages the industry. So, and then you have wines that are 12, they're anything in between, but they came out with certain, categories here. You have 12-year wines, 15-year wines, 20-year wines, or 30-year wines, or even more. And you could have wines anywhere in between, but these are the ones that are permitted on the labels, 12, 15, 20, and 30. And the industry averages around 4. So potentially very long periods of time of those wines staying in those casks. Now there are different styles of Jerez, and based on the amount of alcohol, remember we have the Fino and Manzanilla family and the Oloroso family on the other side. The Fino will be only 45 up to 15%. With that, we're going to make a wine known as biological wine. So these Finos and Manzanillas are wines that are showing that, that prominent and well-known veil or layer of floored yeast. So this is the magic of Jerez here, where these wines at this 15-ish percentage of alcohol will be seeing that formation of yeast appearing on their surfaces only after a few days. This is what Jerez offers, that uniqueness. And then this floor will be transforming these wines over those periods of times, 5, 8, 10 years or more, and consuming alcohol, oxygen, sugars, glycerin, acetic acid, and then providing acetaldehydes. And all these things, same as champagne again, the interaction between the yeast and the actual wine will be shaping the final taste of these wines. And that's why these finos and manzanillas taste so unique, because the floor really has an impactful effect on them under such conditions and for such long periods of time. So these are the driest wines you can try with pretty much no glycerin, like sharp like knives, and very lively despite the 15% of alcohol. These are the finos and manzanillas that you are familiar with. And that's because of the effect of the floor. Now, going back to the wine that is more from a second press, let's say, a little more like coarser, bigger, fuller mouthfeel, those will be, the olorosos, will be 45 to 17% or above 17%. And that makes the wine to have too much alcohol for any floor. So the olorosos, and I'm talking about olorosos now only, will be the ultimate, the architectural, the best example of an oxidative wine, because these from day one, because of being 45 to 17%, will not see any floor at all. And these are wines that keep not only their natural levels of glycerin, they see all those compounds concentrating by evaporation of water. So these olorosos are the opposite from the finos. These are round, big, full, nutty. These are exposed to oxygen. Now, there are a couple more categories that are kind of in between, but more affected by the oxidative aging. And the very well-known one, the Amontillado, is the one that really shows that duality. An Amontillado is a wine that was born as a fino, but then along the way, the yeast starts to fade away, and the wine starts to be exposed to oxygen. But it has the fino palate, or manzanilla palate. That, with time, will become an Amontillado, and then will become darker and get more like the oxidative profile, but keeping the fino palate. The Palo Cortado could be kind of similar to Amontillado, but Palo Cortado usually retains more glycerin. In fact, Palo Cortado is considered more like a style of Oloroso. The difference between Palo Cortado and Oloroso is that an Oloroso is made from that second press, less fine, bigger mouthfeel, fuller base wines. In the case of the Palo Cortado, you meant to make a fino. You meant to make a biological wine, a fino or manzanilla. And then something happens here, and you end up making a very fine oloroso. That could be the description for a Palo Cortado. So those are the dry wines. And then remember, we have another 2% of the sweet wines to produce dessert wines, or very sweet wines, from Muscat, Moscatel de Alexandria, mostly, and Pedro Ximénez. And these are late harvest grapes. And in the case of Pedro Ximénez, they're always dried to the sun, or sun-dried, until they become raisins. And then they make wine out of those. Moscatel could have some sun-drying levels too. But in any case, these are late harvest, very sweet, like high content, sugar content grapes to produce sweet Jerezes. And then going back to the beginning, the famous blends, right? The reason why a lot of people think that Jerez has to be a sweet wine. Well, in the 18th century, the 19th century, in the 20th century, and still today, some traders from Northern Europe, they decided that they wanted a little sweeter styles, and they added small percentage of sweet wines to the dry wines. And they're making all these mediums, medium dry, medium sweet, cream, pale cream, all these other old school maybe styles of wine that are still very important for the region. And that basically are that thing. It's a combination of a base of dry wine with smaller percentages of sweet wines. So very interesting. Massively produced, many of them, but top quality like East India could be an example of these top blends. So just a summary here. Biological wines, free run juice, 15% alcohol, the floor will stay on them, protecting them from the oxygen, so no oxidation, finos and manzanillas. The opposite wines, as far as dries, are the oxidative. The clear example here is the oloroso, and then amontillado is kind of in between these two, and palo cortado is slightly different from oloroso, as we learned. And then the sweet wines here, made from these two other grape varieties, not from Palomino, from Pedro Ximénez and Moscatel. And finally, the blends, when you combine any of these dry wines with percentages of this, you can make the creams. So those are the four styles, four categories, not styles. Then styles, there are a lot of them, but four main categories: biological, oxidative, sweet, and cream. And then a number of styles in between. All right, I think that was pretty much all for the production and the region and the aging and the styles. Here we have things that are, I think, worth pointing out when you get out on the street and try to sell these wines to your customers. There are important things to take into consideration, and one of them is glassware and serving temperature, both. Glassware, because I don't know why, I mean, in the region, cellar masters use small snifters, to assess the wines on the fly. But if you are to enjoy these wines, you want a nice white wine or red wine stem. Well, maybe without stem, but a nice bowl. That's what we recommend, what the Consejo Regulador recommends, a nice piece of glass, as opposed to something you cannot put your nose into. So whenever you recommend this wine to restaurants and bars, let's say use a white wine glass, and you'll let the wine express, show much better. And then temperature is also important, because some people treat these wines like whiskey, and keep them on their back bars. So, well, that may be okay if you're gonna mix them in ice with other drinks and make a cocktail. But if you are to serve these wines out of the bottle, Jerez is not an exception. Any wine in the world has a range of ideal serving temperature. Jerez, in this case, having such a large, spectrum of styles, some of these Jerezes could be better at white wine temperature. Some of them could be better at red wine temperature, and some of them maybe in between. And so refer to that, this presentation or any other content we can share with you for the ideal range for the styles. But you don't want to just grab your bottle from your back bar and pour it into a glass for your, ideally for any wine, right? So any wine of this should be kept in some sort of, a fridge or device, ideally. I know sometimes that's hard, but temperature is also very important here, particularly because we have fortified wines with extra alcohol added to them. So you don't want to drink any warm Jerez, but you don't want to drink any too cold Jerez either. So again, between 45 and 55, 60 tops, that would be the range. And then another important question that a lot of people ask many times is, all right, but then can I keep these bottles, with me for a long time? And we always say, well, let's talk, let's get a closer look. Let's talk more about that. Let's make a distinction between the bottles of wine that you open versus the bottles of wines that you don't open. And if we start with the bottles of wine that you open, I don't want to say don't let your customers to have empty bottles of sherry in their restaurants and bars for years on end. I would not recommend that. because these could be very fragile wines, some of them, and they have been, some of them kept away from oxidation. They're gonna go bad after a few days after you open. They're gonna lose their finesse, their complexity, their balance. So once you open these bottles, try to finish them, because they're 750s. I mean, we're not talking about 3-liter bottles, right? So try to encourage them to finish the bottles once they're open, because after a few days, they could taste very differently, and not in a good way. The other thing is, well, what's up? What happens if I don't open the bottle? And that's a great debate too, and a similar one to champagne too, right? I mean, you can store champagne in your cellar and maybe enjoy it from 10 years from now and be beautiful. It will ultimately depend on your own taste. And not only that, it will ultimately depend on the quality of the wine. Some of the wines will be suited to longer bottle aging. Some of them will not, be gaining any better flavor or complexity or more balance. So it will depend on the quality of the wine. But a lot of people prefer to keep their bottles of finos or amontillados or olorosos for years in their cellars before they enjoy them. So up to the final consumer here, for sure. And two more things. I mean, we know how the wines are being made. We know how to best handle these wines once we have the bottles with us. We know recommendations for our customers to keep the wines and to serve them. Let's go a step farther now. Let's get the most out of them. I mean, and there's two things you can do. I mean, you can probably more, but with Jerez, usually you enjoy them with food, or in the US, a lot of people decide to mix them in drinks and make beautiful cocktails. I think that those could be the two most enjoyable things you can do with the wines. Let's start with food. I mean, we can't stress enough how important it is to really have these wines with food. These are truly food wines. And when we say food, any food, any cuisine, anything you're planning to cook tonight and for the rest of the week or over the weekend, we can find a Jerez to go with that. Because remember, we have the driest wine on the table, we have the sweetest wine on the table, and we have everything in between. So anything you want to cook, we'll find some sherry that will be nice to go with that. Think of like putting together a menu with Jerez only. And when I say a menu, think about these restaurants, that have these 20 or 30 course tasting menus. You could do all that with Jerez only. You could go from oysters to cigars with these wines, and it would be a very enjoyable, highly culinary experience, because these are really wines that really shine with food, and many times with food or ingredients that are difficult to pair otherwise. And so I don't think there is another more versatile wine for food in the world than the wines coming out of the Jerez region. So whenever you recommend these wines to restaurants, bars, even retail stores these days, right? I'm a guy in a retail store. I have a customer walking in or putting an order online, throwing a bottle of sherry there, because you may need it that week if you're going to be cooking certain things. So always try to connect the style of Jerez with a particular cuisine or dish or ingredient or food that you like, or you think your restaurants or your chefs or your bartenders or sommeliers enjoy particularly. So we'll find a Jerez to go with pretty much anything out there. These are nice charts. Here you have by the wine, based on the style. Some suggestions to take you off the ground, but we have, I mean, sky is the limit here. Anything. And again, this could be Japanese, Chinese, Italian, French, Spanish food, anything. Fino Manzanilla, obviously very different from maybe Amontillado Palo Cortado, different from Oloroso, from the creams and sweeter styles, and finally from more the dessert wines. Again, you could go from blue cheese, foie gras, and desserts. That will be the end, starting with, oysters. So we go from oysters here, where they're here, from oysters to, to ice creams and cigars. And we use Jerez only. Anything in between, also Jerez. So always try to make that connection with food. And then for bars or retail stores that sell wine to people who are mixing drinks at home, very difficult to find another wine that performs at these levels with other drinks, with other beverages. And Americans discovered that very early on, because you guys know that the creation of cocktail mastership in the U.S. In the 18th century, or beginning 19th century, many of those cocktails were already using Jerez back in the day, because that's what people had back then. You know, gin, whiskey, sherry, some vermouths or bitters. That's what they had. So Jerez has been used in cocktails in the U.S. From the beginning. And many bartenders now are, recovering those recipes or even making new ones. Low alcohol, low proof cocktails with the same effect that you find when kind of pairing these wines with food. I mean, you can have finos and manzanillas that will make a beautiful, briny, dry, savory, sharp pairing. You can use those same styles to produce a similar profile cocktail. And you can have an oloroso to match porky, fat, Japanese ramen. You can make a cocktail with an oloroso that will go with that particular food as well too. So the profile, the style, all the taste of the wine can be shown through a cocktail too. And then obviously you can use the creams and the peroximeted and other sweeter styles to make cocktails that will be maybe more winterish cocktail, maybe bigger, rounder, sweeter. Here in this case, you don't need to use any simple syrup. The wine is the sweetener. But again, the diversity that you have on the table with food, that same you can create with cocktails. So we have tons of recipes that we can share with you. Bartenders are becoming very creative these days everywhere across the US. But if you need any content anytime, just let us know, because we have a lot of those too. So Eric, back to you. Not sure if you want to touch upon some more stuff that I missed. Let me know.
It's a big topic, obviously, to cover in a short amount of time.
Yes,
so,
it is.
Yeah, no, I certainly appreciate the overview. We may have a question here.
Please, fire your questions.
If you're building a small retail program, just a very skeleton, are you suggesting maybe a single wine from each of the categories? Would you spend a little bit more focus in the
For a store or for a restaurant or for a bar? Or?
For a small retail store that's just beginning with sherry, how would you put that program together?
It's it's a very good question. We consider that there are like 8 measure styles, right? Between 7 and 9. I mean, some people keep some of those out of the equation, but there are at least 7 or 8 measure styles. If we go back, we go from fino or manzanilla fino, then amontillado, oloroso, palo cortado. The creams could be divided into 2, and then you have moscatel, Pedro Ximénez, and so you could have the entire range, but then means that you need 9 or 8 different SKUs. That could be too much for any small retail store, and I understand that totally. Then maybe you can have one biological style, and you could pick out of manzanilla or a fino from Jerez or a fino from El Puerto. Remember the 3 towns. You could be, carrying a biological style from Sanlúcar, that will be a manzanilla, or many finos are from Jerez. So pick one and have a good example of a biological wine, a wine under floor. Then I would say you're going to need an oloroso, because that's the opposite style, which is exposed to the oxygen, opposite to the finos and manzanillas, and are those the bigger, round, more glyceric, oxidative styles of wine. And then maybe a sweet, whether this is a cream or a PX or moscatel. And then you have a small representation of that diversity, right? Because if you raise your hand here with a manzanilla, a glass of manzanilla, and the other hand has a glass of Pedro Ximénez, these are the 2 ends of the spectrum. So you could have a small representation of that. If they allow you for more, then you want to throw in an amontillado, which is this wine that goes in between a fino and an oloroso, and then the palo corta. I mean, trying to answer your question, Eric, if they let you go all the way, it's going to be about 8 or 9 different SKUs. If they cut you shorter, 3 will be the minimum. 2 would be a little sad, and 1 very sad. So that diversity needs to be explained. So a few of them for sure.
Lucas,
That's a good.
Lucas, I had a question. One of our biggest selling, one of the biggest selling Lustau SKUs is East India, which I guess would fall into the cream category? And if you could just describe that and go through it.
Correct. A lot of these blends, the blends still count for about 50% of the global sales. So, and that's because of the volume they're made upon. Some of these famous brands, I'm not talking about Lustau now necessarily, are these historic wines. I'm sure you can name a few of them that have been very successful over the last 2 centuries and ago and more. In UK, Germany, the Netherlands, the US. So the blends could be massive, but there are beautiful, extremely high quality blends, very expensive ones out there as well. East India is a very particular style of cream, because it is a cream, because a cream usually involves a style of oloroso with some amounts of Pedro Ximénez. So it's a sweeter by Pedro Ximénez style of oloroso. And that's a cream. And East India is like that. The thing that kind of sets East India apart from any other standard cream is that in the case of East India, besides being a blend of those 2 wines, the place where East India ages in Jerez, within the winery complex, is there is a little bit higher temperature and a little higher levels of humidity because of the shape of that particular room. So East India is trying to emulate the old style Jerezes that were shipped to, you know, to the Indias, to the East Indias, across the ocean. So that more maderized, a little more Madeira style sherry, because of the slightly higher amounts of temperature, higher elevation, or higher temperature average, and a little more humidity in East India. So a beautiful 15-year total average age wine, where you have an Oloroso that is 12 years old, a Pedro Ximénez that is 12 years old. You blend them together, and then you have those wines aged for another 3 under such conditions. And that makes the total 15, and a very special wine. And we know a very successful wine in the US for sure.
Lucas, we had a question. Maybe what is the most creative or even crazy sherry pairing that you found to work maybe in your restaurant years?
Listen, it's an endless list. I could tell you, I mean, from the most simple sometimes, I mean, if you have a good ham and a glass of sherry, a dry sherry in your other hand, jamón ibérico, a nice ham, as simple as that with these wines is just freaking crazy. But then you say, oh, but I like Thai food. Okay, try something with peanut, you know, maybe a pad Thai with an amontillado. Oh, you know what? My thing is sushi. Oh, really? Have you tried sushi with fino manzanilla? Give it a try. Oh, I like oysters. Have you tried oysters with fino or even with amontillado sometimes? No, try. No, but I like ramen. Have you tried ramen and palo cortado oloroso? One of my favorite things ever. Try. No, I like desserts. I like sweet food. We have it all. So if you want, I can send you a list, but it will be maybe 50 items long. So,
hey, Lucas, I'm going to interrupt real quick. For those of you that don't know, Lucas has been hosting on Fridays on Instagram something called Sherry Pantry, where he's actually doing a lot of very outside the box creative food pairings, like sherry with mac and cheese, like Kraft mac and cheese, your basic out of a box, peanut butter, canned tuna. So you know, if you follow Lustau for that, or if you go to, I think a lot of those videos may even be on the Sherry Journey website. You can see some fun things, and it's a good follow. We're not doing Sherry Pantry this week, but we'll pick it up again next week, I think.
I mean, again, you can make berry menus with sherry only, and still have a very high quality culinary experience, even if you do a long menu with your customers at home, as Kate was saying. I mean, many of the things that you have in your pantry, in your fridge, in your cabinets, in your kitchen, even very well-known brands, you know, from American companies, all that comfort food that you may enjoy on a weekly basis, those could be great with some of these styles. So again, if you are home and then you want to have something a little different, a little toast of peanut butter with East India, have you tried that? I mean, it's really fantastic. So,
it's really fantastic. I have tried it.
So, all right, thank you.
I have tried it. It's really good.
Hey, Lucas, we had really good success with the vermouths out here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about those a little bit?
Sure. So vermouth was very important category in southern Mediterranean countries 200-300 years ago, right? In the 18th century they became very important. Maybe more the Rosso Italian versus the Blanc French, you know, then everyone produced kind of everything. And same for the rest of the Mediterranean coast. Spain, Catalonia producing a lot of vermouth centuries ago, and then Jerez also producing a good amount of vermouth a long time ago. And then after the 60s and the 70s, last century, kind of vermouth overall went a little bit out of fashion everywhere. And now for the last, 5-10 years, vermouth is back. And Jerez producers just decided to recover what they were doing in the past. And the difference between a vermouth from Jerez and a cheap, mass-produced vermouth is that you have, in this case, top quality wines. In the case of the vermouth rojo by Lustau, these are 12-year-old wines that go in there. So we're talking about wines that in a glass would be, very pleasant, very, very high quality. We're not talking about wines that are from, doubtful origins, from grapes that nobody knows where they come from. These are quality wines made into a vermouth through a cold maceration of the botanicals process, and with very quality base wines. So now Lustau has a rojo, which is the first one, then a blanco, and now there's a rosé. So depending on the actual color of the vermouth, as you know, and this is classic in the US, you could be using them for different cocktail recipes. Now, if you want to go the Spanish way or the Southern Mediterranean way, then you want to have those vermouths just on the rocks with a twist of citrus, maybe a splash of sparkling water, or maybe some people sometimes like a little bit of orange juice, but neat, solo, ice. And this is the way they are enjoyed, or they used to be enjoyed in Southern Europe. So in the US, maybe more in cocktails, but these are beautiful wines on ice as well, and a beautiful aromatized wines, beautiful vermouth, on ice as well. But tons of applications too. I mean, again, based on the color of the vermouth, more one style of cocktail or another. And then the rosé, which is the latest one, that's more for a spritz style of drink. So depending on the three products, again, I'm sure we can share tons of recipes with you that you can show your customers.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yvette had shared a couple things, including your bio, Lucas, which is fun to look at. And we'll follow up with recipes as well as the presentation for any of those who would like as well. And then love to take some time on vermouths in another meeting.
Sure. We actually have Steven focusing on that, so he could give you an in-depth seminar on the vermouths anytime in the future. Just let us know.
Excellent. We're coming to close of the time here. I'm going to appreciate Lucas and Yvette and Kirk for joining us and helping out, and all the guests who were able to pop in as well.